Namaste.
Namaste.
So we're at that curious, dreaded by me time of the church year, which is Advent, because there's a problem. And the problem is that Advent is about two things: waiting for the celebration of the birth of the Christ child, and making excuses for why it is that Jesus hasn't come again yet. And I'd rather not make excuses about why it is that maybe they got that wrong. And I thought it might be interesting instead to explore the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism and tie them, where it's possible, to those four Advent themes. And you might think that the first week being hope, I'm up against an impossible task in trying to tie the truth of suffering to hope. But that's okay, I kind of like impossible tasks. And you can bend anything far enough to make it fit, almost. But I don't think you have to bend it very much. Because, and let me say right out, I don't like the suffering word. I don't think it's a good translation. And that's why I put that first reading in there that talked about the different possibilities. And if you've ever studied a foreign language, you know that there are words that just don't translate exactly. Or words that require a sentence to translate in one language what's said in one word in another language. And has anybody here ever studied German? Remember Schrecklich? and this was, I heard it before Shrek came out, and so it's this word that sort of conveys something that's just horrible, but it could be horrible in an embarrassing sort of way, it could be horrible in any number of ways, but it's none of the ways you can translate it really express the horror inherent. I had a man when I worked in the nursing home who I was taking care of, and he was there for subacute rehabilitation. I think he had broke a leg or something. And he was German and spoke with a heavy accent. And one day he had something embarrassing happen, and he all he could say was ganz, which means completely, schrecklich, ganz schrecklich, ganz schrecklich. And I hadn't heard the word in at least 10 years. But I remembered it, and given what had happened that I won't mention, it completely conveyed what I know he felt at that moment in a way that no English word or even phrase could capture. And I think dukkha, as opposed to dookie, although it can be related, is another one of those words. It just doesn't. If we translate it as suffering, then I think, for me anyway, I get this image of somebody who is just suffering, terribly uncomfortable, way out of the ordinary sort of stuff, in a lot of pain physically or emotionally. Anguish. The world as they know it has either ended or been so radically transformed that it will never be the same in their eyes. Well, fortunately, that doesn't happen very often in life. So if that's what the Buddha meant when he said suffering exists, I think the response would sort of be, well, yeah, but who cares? It probably won't happen to me. We can convince ourselves that it's not going to happen to us. What if, though, you said what he was trying to say was, life doesn't always work out the way we expect it's going to. Stuff happens. If we had our way, things would turn out differently, but we don't have our way. And that creates problems. And I think if you look at it that way, it covers just about everything from going to the store on Black Friday to get that television and finding out it's sold out, to when you're absolutely in anguish, and everything in between. The truth is, things don't work out the way that we would like them to, that we would prefer them to. And of course, one of the more tragic examples of that happened this week as we had another domestic terrorist attack. So the challenge becomes, I think, the Advent theme for today, which is hope. Now, hope isn't, I hope I get a pony for my birthday. Well, that's one kind of hope. That's not the hope we're talking about. But hope might be what you need when somebody drops a pony off at your house unexpectedly and says, you need to take care of this because I can't do it. Hope is that quality that says, I can handle this. Or at least, with help, I can handle this. If somebody drops a pony off at my door, I'm resourceful enough to contact some place that can take care of the pony, make arrangements to get the pony transported out there, donate the pony, and so I won't end up with a dead pony in my front yard. It'll be somewhere it can be taken care of. A lot of pony dukkha. Which is one of the, there's actually used to be a wonderful sermon online from St. Mary's Episcopal Church in St. Paul or Minneapolis. And because my wife isn't here, I can say, same difference. I think it was St. Paul. And her sermon was called NPFYB. No pony for your birthday. And it's important, actually, in hope. And what she was saying is sometimes we want things or even pray for things, and we don't think out the full consequences. So a child wants a pony for their birthday, but they don't have a pasture for the pony to romp in. They don't have a barn to put the pony in the stable. Nobody's going to want to muck out the stable, even if they had one. And how sometimes something seems like a really good idea to us, and there's other pieces to it that we haven't considered. Which again is, life is unsatisfactory. Things don't work out the way we expect them to. There's messy bits. And tidying them up isn't always as easy as we might hope it would be. And it's really important, I think, to get our heads wrapped around that, because then we won't be that person on the news saying, why me? We do a lot of things spiritually and religiously to try and avoid or answer the why me question. And sometimes we've had some really horrifying answers. Why me? Well, you missed church last week. Well, why me? Oh, when's the last time you were at confession? Why me? Well, you didn't keep the law perfectly. Why me? You haven't been practicing your meditation as you should. Why me? And we so want to answer that question with a single concrete answer that we come up with some pretty horrific things. Why did Fred die? Well, because God loved him more than you do. So God needed Fred. Yeah, I mean all those bad funeral things. It's Schrecklich, yeah. Fred is in a better place now. Well, how comforting is that to the people who miss Fred? Not a bit. Or try not to talk about it. Fred expired. If we knew, as George Carlin used to say, we could have renewed him.
Picked out one with a later expiration.
That's right. Let's see, just like when you're shopping for milk, you have to turn them around and make sure you don't get an old one. And if we can accept that things happen and avoid the temptation to say that we shouldn't feel bad about that, we find ourselves in a much healthier place. If we can accept that the car breaks down, every car, if it stays around long enough, will probably break down at some point in its lifespan, even if it's only the big one at the end, when it heads to the junkyard. And so the car breaking down doesn't become I did something wrong, I've displeased some power in the universe. It just is that unsatisfactory stuff happens. Stuff outside our control happens. This is my 4th cold this winter. How can this be? It happens. It doesn't mean you're saying, yay, another cold. But on the other hand, it can save us from personalizing those things and believing that the fact that things happen that we aren't too crazy about is a sign of our own defectiveness. It's just a sign of the way the universe functions. You know, why does the tornado turn and take out one street and not another? There's not a good answer to that. But in that case, you might say, suffering exists. And it sets us up, and the second reading was sort of an overview of the Buddha's 4 Noble Truths, but it sets us up for the 3 that follow. And the interesting thing about them is the 4 Noble Truths are a path from saying things happen, from apparently saying things happen that are beyond our control, to learning that what we can control is our response to them. We can control our reaction to them. And in a very real way, that does give us some power. I always hear stories about Thanksgiving gatherings gone south. And really, if you think about, if you ever had one or heard about a fight at the Thanksgiving dinner table, it only arises because somebody decides that they can't just walk away from it. And there's probably issues and times that you can't walk away from it, that our integrity demands that we stay. But there's a choice there. The person who's a little bit obnoxious and starts the problem can't be controlled. But in the end, we can control our response. And that's the hope of the 4 Noble Truths as they play out. And maybe that's the hope of Advent. Maybe what people were misunderstanding in the early days of the church was that Jesus' return wasn't going to be a single event. It wasn't necessarily going to be in the way that they expected. And the truth is that Christ's Spirit returns all the time, again and again and again. But if we lose hope, we don't see it. If we close our minds to the possibility, we won't see it. If we insist that it has to happen our way, if Jesus is going to come again, he's going to show up in this city at this time with this haircut and this color skin, we're never going to see it. And so the challenge is that we remain open to whatever is, the good and the bad, and that we appreciate it honestly so that we can address it honestly. And by doing so, reduce the amount of our own anguish and suffering.